And welcome in to the Rock Talk Studio, a rock and roll conversation on where to find the next great rock and roll book or documentary. This is the podcast that reviews, previews, and most importantly, recommends to you the good stuff. Like today's book, which chronicles the festival, the granddaddy of them all. We're talking Lollapalooza, and there's a lot of history here and a ton of wild tales. I'm your host, Big Rick. Join me for an exclusive look into what's hitting the shelves and the screens, and get ready to rock your reading and viewing list. And today, the spotlight falls on the new book, Lollapalooza, the uncensored story of rock's wildest festival. And it's written by Richard Beinstock and Tom Beaujour. Perry Farrell, right in the beginning of this book, said, "I wanted to be in a band that would alter the history of music, a band that would change the rotation of the earth." Well, he nailed it with this one, sort of. I mean, I don't think his band ever reached those heights, but his idea about this festival sure did. And that's what this book is about, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And looking back at it, which this book does, really puts this idea up against some of the most important game-changing moments in rock and roll history. So this book is an oral history, and I need to share a little story here before I begin. If you've listened to the show before, you know I'm not the biggest fan of oral histories, though I did read a great book last year called I Don't Want to Go Home, The Oral History of the Stone Pony. Awesome look at the iconic New Jersey club. It actually won the Rock Talk Studio Podcast Award for Best Book Not About a Band or Band Member. And it's kind of weird because I just finished up this Lollapalooza book, started recording this episode, and I'm currently reading a Brian Wilson book about the Smile record, which is also an oral history book. And now this. So did this Lollapalooza book change my mind about oral histories? Let's take a look. Perry Farrell's idea was a game changer. It turned this thought into an iconic, thriving monster called Lollapalooza. And it all started at a time when Jane's Addiction, his band, was collapsing. And even though the band was just kind of getting started, Perry decided, all right, I'm going to break up the band. I want to go out big. I want to do this kind of caravan thing with a bunch of different bands. I want to have crazy food like giant burritos. I want to set up booths with different political affiliations like PETA right next to the NRA. And he wanted to do this mix of wild cultures for a farewell tour. And his agent said, okay, let's do it. This book takes a look at this idea and this amazing thing called Lollapalooza with over 200 interviews from a multitude of different people who put this thing together. We're talking about road managers and agents, promoters, critics, sound managers, tour directors. And what it does, it combines that with the artists who played the shows. And here's really where this book kind of takes a leap, and why I liked it so much is because the massive contribution of all the artists who played Lollapalooza, and they are over the top with recalling their day-to-day of this festival. There's crazy stories in here, wild stories, and that really, to me, carries this book. And there's just too many names to name, but most who played contributed here. So I'm not going to go through and name all the names, but you get a sense after all the years that have passed and looking back on it, they didn't care anymore, and they were willing to talk about what was going on and what was happening when they were playing these shows. And a lot of them don't hold back. You get good and bad. All the stories of being on the road together, how they felt about the new festival, what it was like. Some liked the idea, some didn't think it was going to work. They liked the diversity of it. But there was also times where there was a ton of tension. They were battling over slot times, when bands would go on, when they would come off. They had to deal with logistics and weather and different egos. Courtney Love came out on tour one year and pissed everybody off. There's a ton of band stories here. And even though you get contributions from a bunch of other people, and that really fills the story out, which I enjoyed, but it's the band stories and the retelling of how it went down day by day that takes up a majority of this book and really creates the vibe for how wild this thing was. And it's a good take on this because you get what was going on with this festival from all different angles. You get a lot of depth. There's a lot of talk about the contracts and the deals that were made, about how the bands were pitched, about some bands who rejected it, the logistics, and the artist takes and how they approached and handled playing Lollapalooza. The book goes through it year by year It starts at the beginning in 91 and then runs up until 97. The first lineup I wanted to mention that was really cool. Henry Rollins, the Butthole Surfers, Ice-T with Body Count, 9 Inch Nails, Living Colour, Susie and the Banshees, and then Jane's Addiction was a headline. And Jane's was a complete mess at that time. Dave Navarro, the lead guitar player, had a huge heroin addiction, and Perry was deep into pulling this festival thing off and just kind of being Perry. He was quoted as saying he was out to blow young people's minds. That's what he really wanted to do. And I think he really did it with this. It was something that was never done before. They took these shows into the Midwest, and that was an original thing. No traveling festival ever went into the Midwest of America, so there's a lot of skepticism about how that would work, and they pulled it off. But it really wasn't until the second year's lineup until this thing blew up, and that was the one that grabbed everybody's attention. And then came the record labels, and then came the press, and everybody clamoring for spots and slots and advertising and all that. Great lineup that year. Pearl Jam, Jesus and the Mary Chain, Soundgarden, Ice Cube, Ministry, and then the Red Hot Chili Peppers were the headliner. Kind of a cool thing about that show was Pearl Jam came out early in the day, and that was right when their first album first came out. That's when Eddie Vedder was climbing up, lighting scaffolds and jumping into crowds, and it got a lot of buzz. This was the band to see, so people would come early to see Pearl Jam and then stay throughout the rest of the day to see the rest of the bands. So it really worked for them. That second season was hugely popular. It also laid claim to another thing, which was the second stage. That was the first time a second stage was used. I know it's commonplace now, second, third stage. Coachella has a bunch of different stages, but the second stage is examined also in this book. So you get to see the progression of the artist who played that and how it became kind of a it thing to play that side stage, that second stage. 1997 was the last year for the original version of it. In the epilogue of the book, it explains how it started up again in 2003. So the book is made up primarily of the big years of the festival before it was bought out and moved to a permanent location in Chicago. Lollapalooza began as an alternative dream. It was Perry's vision for a cultural mishmash, and it grew into something that no one thought it could ever be. You get a really good insight of how much they were taking chances and how they were just day by day in it in this book. And I don't think you could get any closer to the Lollapalooza story than this. You get to see the spark that was lit, the birth of this thing, and then how it grew and led to changes not only in the music industry, which was huge, but also as a cultural force. And this book uses an abundance of voices to tell you what was going on and how it really happened while securing it in its rightful place as an iconic movement in rock and roll history. This is definitely a good one. I recommend it. And I'm glad to say it was a great oral history. So one of the big questions that popped up to me when I first started reading this book, and that's this week's one big question, and that was Lollapalooza the first culture-breaking festival? Let's take a look and see if that statement's true. The answer is coming up right after I tell you about a book I'm giving away to one lucky listener, and I'm telling you, this listener is going to be very lucky because this book currently sits at the #1 spot on the Rock Talk Studio list of top 5 books of 2025. You are going to get the best of the best with this one. So what is that #1 recommended book so far this year? Well, it's the amazing Mike Campbell memoir entitled Heartbreaker that he wrote with Ari Sertival. And this is such an incredible read. I can't say enough about it. I read this book in like 3 or 4 days. I just burned through it. I couldn't put it down. So engaging, so personal. And it is the other side of the Tom Petty story. We've read a bunch of Tom Petty books. There's the great Warren Zanes biography. There's Conversations with Tom Petty, the absolute treasure by Paul Zollo. And now we have this kind of the missing link. And it really gives you the complete story of Tom. And I'm really happy that I'm able to give this book to someone. So you're going to get this book by signing up for my newsletter. And what the newsletter is, I call it The Blast. It's something that I wanted to create as a resource that you can refer to when trying to come up with your next great rock and roll book you want to check out or documentary you want to see. It's a news source, and it also has a power ranking of the top 5 rock and roll books and docs as we go through the year, so it changes as new releases come out. Again, Mike's on top right now. And to get the Rock Talk Studio Blast, the newsletter sent, it comes out one time a month, so I'm not going to spam you with a bunch of stuff every week. It's just one time, last Friday of the month, and you get entered to win the memoir Heartbreaker. All you have to do is send me an email, and that's info@rocktalkstudio.com, and I'll hook you up. Was Lollapalooza the first groundbreaking festival? Not really. There was actually, well, at that level that they took it to, yes, but when it first started, there was another festival that was happening called the Gathering of the Tribes. And it's crazy because I actually saw a show. They only played 2 of them in Costa Mesa. When it first appeared, it was a 2-day music festival and culture festival. So it was in that same vein. It was put together by Ian Ashbury of The Cult and legendary San Francisco promoter Billy Graham. I thought that was really cool. And it was in 1990, and this was a year before Lollapalooza started. The festival was held at the Shoreline Amphitheater in Mountain View on October 6th. And the show I saw at the Pacific Amphitheater in Costa Mesa on October 7th. It's interesting that they had some very similar Lollapalooza acts play this show. Artists that were included on the gig were Soundgarden, Ice-T, Indigo Girls, Queen Latifah, Joan Baez, Steve Jones, Michelle Shocked, Iggy Pop, The Cramps, Mission UK, and Public Enemy. So the bill was larger and a little bit more diverse than those first couple Lollapalooza years. In 1991, they tried to do a traveling thing, kind of a la Lollapalooza with multiple venues. And this bill featured X, Fishbone, Steve Earle, EPMD, Huru Gurus, Primus, and King's X, among others. This version of the tour didn't do well for them, and it ran into some financial trouble and actually canceled before all the dates were completed. But was that really the first Gathering of the Tribes festival? So I dug in a little bit deeper, and I found this really cool festival. It was called the Human Be-In, and it was held in San Francisco Golden Gate Park on January 14th, 1967. It was put together by artist Michael Bowen, and he advertised the event in an underground newspaper in San Francisco, calling it a gathering of tribes for the human being. He hoped to bring together tribes of the San Francisco, the kind of the psychedelic hippies that were there, and the Berkeley anti-war activists. And a lot of people showed up. About 20 to 30,000 people came to the polo fields in San Francisco Golden Gate Park. It was a day-long event, and the only infrastructure they had was a flatbed truck and an amp. And there were counterculture icons there. Timothy Leary, Ram Dass, Allen Ginsberg addressed the crowd. And this is where Timothy Leary shared that famous phrase, turn on, tune in, and drop out. So there's a lot of cool history with this one too. And the bands that played were awesome. It was the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, and Big Brother and the Holding Company. Could you imagine those guys going on tour now as a Lollapalooza festival thing? That would be a pretty big draw. So there's the history of a Gathering of a Tribes, the original festival right before Lollapalooza that kind of sparked Perry to create this amazing, iconic festival that is really well represented and looked at in this new book, Lollapalooza, the Uncensored Story of Rock's Wildest Festival. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Love talking rock and roll with you and being able to give you a scoop on a title I think is worth your time and money. Remember, if you want to get in on that Mike Campbell book giveaway, just shoot me an email. I'll put the address to my email in the show notes. All right, let's tear it down, pack it up, and head on down the road. We'll see you next time in the Rock Talk Studio.